This is a weekly STEP meeting. Our format is as follows. A speaker is asked to talk for 25 to 30 minutes on the STEP of that week, followed by discussion or questions until 7 p.m. You can find these weekly meetings on our YouTube page, the Conscious Contact Speaker Group of Doylestown. And don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe, and share. Okay. That brings us to the speaker portion of the meeting on this day, July 5th, 2021, in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, at the Monday night 6 p.m. Stay Alive Literature and Step Group at St. Paul's Lutheran Church. Tonight's speaker is George, and he will be sharing his experience on Step 4. So please help me welcome George.
Thank you guys so much for having me. My name's George and I'm an alcoholic. And it's awesome to be out here on a federal holiday. Congratulations to anyone who's made it out here tonight. You are among the sickest of the alcoholics because we're actually in an in-person meeting, myself included, on a holiday. And anyone on the tape is probably even sicker because you weren't here. So anyway, having a little fun. I really like the energy of this meeting and coming up and hanging out with Ron and seeing you and Chris, because it's always fun. Like, AA is supposed to be fun. This is supposed to be an exciting place. We're recreating our lives. It's supposed to. I believe personally that meetings are a pep rally for God, right? They're a pep rally to get people excited about going through the 12 steps who haven't gone through the 12 steps yet. So that's what my purpose is tonight, is to reach someone who may not have gone through the 12 steps, or maybe who has and doesn't have a current experience with this in their life, and get them excited about it again. And tonight I'm tasked with talking about Step 4, and I'm going to read a little bit through the book and have a little bit of fun with it. So, and before I do that, the other book that we have up here, right, the 12 and 12, a fantastic book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I personally really got into it after I went through the 12 steps, had an experience, and used it for sponsorship. It's not the greatest when it comes to using it for instructions for inventory. It can be quite confusing if you're trying to write a proper 4-step inventory out of the big book. So I'm going to stick to what we're talking about in the big book because I believe that's where the directions are. And if you're an alcoholic like me, the less complicated this is, the better. Simplicity is a spiritual principle. And I will sit there, and I have a history. I came in November of 2005, and I didn't get sober until May 26th of 2015. And I had multiple 4 steps that were super long. I had one I literally counted that was 60 pages long because I'm self-obsessed, and I will sit there and complicate it and make it this crazy, silly thing. Now, the 4th step that I did when I got sober in 2015, to give you guys a little bit of personal experience, was about 10 pages long. I had about 15 resentments at the most, maybe 10 fears, and a little bit of sex conduct. And I wrote it in about 2.5 hours in a clubhouse. And I'd heard people talk about it. You can write a good 4-step between 2 and 4 hours. I'd heard it for years, and I just didn't believe it. And then I sat down and did it. One of the things that new people get caught up with, like, well, what if I forget this? We have a 10-step for that. We have an 11-step. We can catch it later. As long as you're not intentionally leaving something off of this, we're okay. We can move forward. So looking at some of the specific stuff, right? So we've just done Step 3, and if we're talking about Step 4, and so we made a decision that we're going to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand Him. And Step 4 is the first tangible action of that decision. And it says, our liquor was but a symptom, so we had to get down to causes and conditions. Therefore, we started upon a personal inventory. This is Step 4. A business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. Taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding and a fact-facing process. It is an effort to discover the truth about the stock in trade. One object is to disclose damaged or unsellable goods, to get rid of them promptly and without regret. If the owner of the business is to be successful, he cannot fool himself about values. What's that mean for me? One of the best metaphors I've heard in Alcoholics Anonymous that's not original to me, that really makes a lot of sense, is the metaphor of taking inventory of a fruit stand. And not fooling myself about values. Let's just make it simple. We'll make it an orange stand. If I have a stand and I'm selling oranges, and I decide to keep like a couple bad oranges in the back, and I'm not honest with myself, and I'm like, you know what? I can keep these. I can try to sell them and push them off. What's going to happen is that the disease and the oranges are pretty much dead. It's going to spread to the other oranges, and the whole cart's going to end up contaminated because I'm not being honest with myself about values. But if I get rid of those 2 or 3 bad oranges, the whole cart's good. And I'm able to put new oranges in, excuse me, and I'm able to move forward. And I will cling onto this stuff. And I don't want to let it go for years. And it will contaminate my entire life. And it's just that I like that metaphor because it makes the most sense to what resentment does to me. And what happens when resentment's removed, and how much new stuff comes in that I'm not even aware of, and I can't see is going to come in. It's a real big trust process for me, because it's like, if I let go of this, like, who am I going to be? Like, the hole in the donut? Am I going to have a personality? I just really, I don't know how to exactly explain it when it comes down to it, but I really was attached to these resentments. And excuse me, if anyone has had justified anger, I'm sure we can all relate to that. I've got a couple situations that I had recently that I was holding on to. I don't really have anything right now. But it's really hard to let that stuff go. And I think if I just manage it, and it goes right back to the step 3 proposition that I'm trying to control and be the actor. If I just hold on to this tight enough, I'm going to make it right. I'm going to force my will on it. Well, I let it go. I have to have this trust that God's going to take care of it, and something better is going to come into my life. And it has. And to put a little bit of belief behind that, when I walked in 2015, I had maybe a week's worth of clothes, 3 books, and a cell phone when I came to Philadelphia. And that's it. And I'm here to tell you, I drove in my car here tonight that I purchased, first car I've ever purchased. I have a job. I had another job before that for 5 years that I quit with 3 weeks' notice to advance my career. I've obtained an associate's degree, and I'm going for an undergraduate degree because I've been able to stay stable. And AA has given me all this stuff that I didn't even see was coming. I'd given up on college before I got sober. But because I let go of that fear, I was able to allow the ability to have a belief that maybe I could go to college again. Excuse me, got a tickle in my throat. We did the exact same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. First, we searched out our flaws, and we searched out the flaws in our makeup. Thank you, Ron. Which caused our failure. Being convinced that self, manifested in various ways, was what defeated us, we considered its common manifestations. So the 4th step in the Big Book deals with 3 common manifestations: resentment, fear, and sex conduct. And it was Bill's belief, it was the Oxford Group's belief, and then AA's belief that those 3, with dealing with that, kind of takes care of all the rest. Because it all kind of comes in through those 3. And once you get going with resentment, I'm not going to make this a 401 class, but really, everything behind resentment is all fear anyway. It's really, there are very few resentments that are pure resentments and pure anger. I usually have a resentment. I'm usually angry because I'm afraid that I'm going to lose something that I already have, or I'm not going to get something that I want, or I'm afraid of what someone thinks of me. And those are where most of my resentments stem from. So they're really all fear-based anyway. But so we'll start with resentment. Resentment is the number one offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. But from it stem all forms of spiritual disease, for we have not only been mentally and physically ill, we have been spiritually sick. Now here's an important part. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. When I walk into Alcoholics Anonymous, it looks like I need to get a job, I need to keep a job, and it looks like I need to get emotionally stable somehow, maybe go see a psychiatrist, do all this other stuff besides actually doing the 12 steps. Because once I get my life in order, everything's going to fix itself. But and the book is saying once I straighten out the spiritual malady, I straighten out mentally and physically. And I can tell you, like, I didn't have employment for a couple months. God kind of took care of it. I was able to work and get money before I got full-time employment. But, like, I didn't have employment, and I was mainly focused on doing the 12 steps and then sponsoring people in 2015. And I straightened out spiritually, and the mental and the physical was overcome because I did that. And it's so important. I mean, how many times have we seen? I'm sure you guys have all had experience with new people when they come in and they just get so focused. I've got to get the job. I've got to get my family back. I've got to do this. Breathe. Take a second. Let's take the next month or two to go through the 12 steps, and then we can worry about that stuff. Let's take a pause. Let's get a grip on what's going on with your life, and let's triage this. AA is really, for me, AA is an emergency room for the sick. It's something I heard a couple of years ago. It's an emergency room for the sick, not a museum for saints. And may I never forget that. Because I like to forget that and just come to meetings and I want to hear what I want to hear and I'm going to go. But the whole point of why we're here, ultimately, primary purpose is to reach a new person and help them stay sober. AA has never been designed for us. It's designed for the person who hasn't come in yet or is just walking in. That's what AA is designed for. That's stolen from Ricky D. So, back to the resentments. So it's a really important concept. Spiritual maladies overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. I'm the kind of guy, I'll be goofy. Well, you know what? Maybe I can go type them on my computer. I mean, if that works, cool. But realistically, I think there's something really special about putting a pen to paper. Something spiritual that happens between my body when I'm actually sitting there and actually writing something out. To the point where I've even done it with a 10-step at night. I don't do it all the time, and I haven't done it in a lot of years, but there were times where I'd write down my 10 steps throughout the day, or write down a 11 step at night, where I'd actually write it all out. Because there's something that happens when I do that. So the book's saying we set them on paper. We listed people, institution, or principles with whom we were angry. And it talks about what we look at, why we're angry. I'm going to skip over a little bit of the inventory when it comes to resentment. It's the reading itself. We're basically establishing a pattern. And this is something I get wrong, too, because you hear people and you come into the room and people talk about taking a year to write the 4th step, or telling your entire life story. And it can be confusing. Because the book does say we don't get sober unless we tell someone else our entire life story. But what I think they're talking about there is if I'm sitting down with another alcoholic on my 5th step and I've written all this stuff down, there's some stuff that doesn't quite fit in that parameter, and I'm holding on to that I'm ashamed of, that should come out. And as a sponsor, I should be able to pull that out of a sponsee. That's my job. I don't think it means that I need to sit there and look at like little Jimmy who stole a kickball from me in kindergarten. I mean, maybe if that really is what's keeping you from getting sober, put it down. Don't leave it off. But I will get caught in the minutia of nonsense and not look at what's really tearing apart my life. I'm not like, oh, my mom kicked me out of my house. That probably should be on the list. God hasn't given me like everything I want without having to work for it. Like, that should probably be on my list. These AA people are mad at me for relapsing. They should probably be on my list. Like, the things that are really grinding my gears need to be on the list. And once I have them on the list, I take a look at why I was angry. It's really important, too, I'll throw this on here, that we go down by column and not go over by row. So I go down, I list people, institutions, or principles, and I skip a couple lines. People, institutions, or principles. I usually pray before I start writing, because I've done a couple since I've been sober. And I go down, and I'll, all right, Mom, skip a couple lines, God. And then when I'm done, I go over and I skip the cause. I write down the cause. I was resentful towards my mom because of this. And a lot of that, I think, some of that comes from Joe and Charlie. I don't know exactly where the methodology comes from exactly, but it's really helpful for me because I will sit there as an alcoholic. Is anyone else resentful? I mean, we're talking about a whole step, right? I will sit there and get lost in the sauce. If I sit there and I go, all right, my mom, because she kicked me out, it affects this. You know what? I'm mad. This person's really annoying. But instead, it keeps me moving forward and not staying stuck. So that's why we're going down column by column. So then the third column, what's it affect? It affects my self-esteem, ambitions, personal relations, sex relations, or security. It's one of those 5 things. And the book talks about that, and I can write that down. Usually it's at least 3 of them, almost all the time per resentment. And then the 4th column, which is when I did my first 4th step in 2015, I didn't do a 4th column. My sponsor and I kind of did it together when we did step 5. And he's since changed how he does it, and I really am a big believer in having someone do step 4. And the book talks about we resolutely look for our own mistakes. One of the most common things in Alcoholics Anonymous that boggles my mind is people, I got to look for my part. If someone was molested, if something bad happened that's traumatic, please don't tell them they had a part in it, because they didn't. The book doesn't say that. I resolutely look for my own mistakes. Now, I can say that maybe I had a mistake. I'm trying to think for something to talk about. That's actually my experience real quick. So I had something. I can think, like, my mistake is that I'm still holding on to it 20 years later with that. And that may be the only mistake that I have. And then I have to, for myself, let go of it to move forward. But that's it. I didn't play a part in that, for God's sake. And the book's very clear. Resolutely look for our own mistakes. And when we're on the 4th column, what we're writing down is where we're selfish, self-seeking, frightened, and what's the 4th one? I usually have this. Hold on. I got going really good. Selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, or frightened. So I'll examine those 4 things and see where my mistakes were with that resentment. Usually, on a solitary self-appraisal, I can come up with something. I can usually see something. This, the 4th column is, in my experience, during a fifth step where a little bit more usually comes out, because usually a sponsor will be able to pull a little bit more out. Well, you were dishonest, but maybe you were selfish there too, and you can throw that out. But that's more for next week. So I've written these 4 things down, right? And I've gone through these 4 columns. I've written this 4th step out on the resentment part. What next? And this is a part that I think that my sponsor had me do, and I think it's beneficial. It's not necessarily laid out in the book, but after I did a 5th step, I actually went and prayed the resentment prayer for each one of those resentments, just to get in the habit of doing it. I don't think it hurts. And I'm going to go over the resentment prayer because it's just such a powerful thing. So it says, this was our course, and I'm on page 66 if anyone has the book, the bottom. This is our course. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. So perhaps everyone in my life has been spiritually sick. There's a part that's really important that I missed for a little bit. Though we did not like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. So now I'm on the same plane as these people. I'm also spiritually sick. We asked God to help them show us the same tolerance, pity, and patience we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man or woman. How can I be helpful to him? God save me from being angry. Thy will be done. Really, really powerful and an important prayer. And what my sponsor had me do to change it is, all right, Ron is a sick man. Save me from being angry. How can I be helpful to him? God, thy will, not mine, be done. Throw the person's name in. Or Sheila, I'm resentful towards Sheila. She's a sick woman. Make it a little bit more personal. So that, and when I started doing that, I was able to remember it. So it's not just a little prayer on a book. It actually becomes part of my toolkit that I'm using on a daily basis that I'll begin to use again on step 10, which is what I had the privilege of speaking about the last time. Because this becomes a part of our life. It becomes a lifestyle. We're not just doing this 4th step to have it be a one and done. A lot of people think when they come into AA, they're like, oh, I did the 12 steps. Apparently, it's a way of life. There's no doing the 12 steps. I'm living the 12 steps. I may be doing 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis and maintaining and growing my spiritual life, but it never really ends. I'm going to read the next paragraph, too, because I think it's important. We avoid retaliation or argument. We wouldn't treat sick people that way. If we did, we destroy our chance of being helpful. Sometimes I'm going to argue, and I will pay the consequence when I do that. I have an amends, and I can do that, but I risk not being helpful in the future, and that has happened. Sober, I have had an argument, or I've gotten mad with someone, and that friendship no longer exists. So, the book's really clear. We try to avoid that. We cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God will show us how to take a kindly and tolerant view of each and every one. And my friend Eric, I love it, Eric, taught me something really valuable here too. So sometimes at the same time we talk about with our 12th step that we practice these principles in all our affairs. If I can't practice the principles in an affair, I remove myself from that affair. And I don't need to put a judgment on that person, but if I'm at a place of employment, this happened to me where I worked for 5 years, where I just could not be resentful where the way that they were doing things. My vision and their vision didn't align. It doesn't make them bad. It doesn't make me bad. It doesn't make them wrong or me wrong. It just, we didn't align anymore. And I struggled practicing principles, so I found a new job. I also advanced my career, and it was a good thing all around, and I left on amicable terms. So it's important that I really do everything I can to avoid causing harm. Because I could have stayed there, and I could have caused more harm and made a mess. This happens with romantic relationships as well, and friendships. Sometimes it's okay that maybe I'm not friends with anyone, but I can walk away and not say something hurtful to that person and leave on good terms and say, it's just we're not seeing eye to eye. And maybe things start off. It's happened to me where that's happened, and then 6 months later someone calls, makes an amends to me, or vice versa, and we start things up again, and it's better than it ever was. But I really believe at the core of what we're trying to do is to be helpful to people and to at least not hurt them. At least not hurt people. There's the own mistakes. All right, so looking at fear, I kind of mentioned fear already as being what drives resentment. And it says, notice the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, the employer, and the wife. If you haven't read the book, there's a section in there where it lists Bill's fictional 4-step, and they have fear in the 4th column next to self-esteem and stuff on some of the resentments. This short word somehow touches about every aspect of our lives. It was an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence was shot through with it. It set in motion trains of circumstances which brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve. But did not we ourselves set the ball rolling? Sometimes we think fear ought to be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more trouble. How many times, oh, you know what, she's going to dump me. And then you hear people talk about like law of attraction and AA. That's not AA stuff, but you hear law of attraction and that kind of stuff, and it plays into fear. All right, she's going to dump me. And then I start taking actions based on fear that land me at an outcome I'm trying to avoid. Also an Eric quote. And I land at this outcome I'm trying to avoid because I'm afraid. And the fear causes me to do things that I normally wouldn't do. So that's what they're talking about with this evil and corroding thread that happens in my life. And maybe it's I'm afraid of what these people think of me. I'm afraid at work of not getting a raise. So you know what? I'm afraid. There's a great example. They're not going to give me a raise, so I'm just going to show up late today. It leads to a resentment, right? That fear leads to a resentment, and the action that I'm taking now is actually put me in a position to not get the raise that I have fear that I'm not going to get. I want to say feared up so bad, and it's such a Philly thing, so I'm not going to. But if you guys ever hear feared up, it's a real Philly thing. Anyway, quick side note. So I'm experiencing this fear, and I'm taking actions based on the fear, and it brings things up. So that's really what that paragraph's talking about. And when we're putting the fears on paper, it says, we reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper even though we had no resentment in connection with them. We asked ourselves why we had them. Wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? Self-reliance was good as far as it went, but it didn't go far enough. Some of us once had great self-confidence, but didn't fully solve the fear problem or any other. When it made us cocky, it was worse. And I'll talk about the solution in a second. So how I write a fear inventory most of the time, list the fears, list why I have them. There's different ways to do it. I've done it where I've done a 4-column fear inventory. I think it's the next paragraph really talks about the importance of why I did the fear inventory. And my belief is as long as we list them and we get it out and we're using the fear prayer, it's more important to be looking towards God to remove the fears than it is to analyze and go like, I can sit here and tell you, like, I'm afraid of the dark because I watched Ernest Scared Stupid when I was a kid, and they had these trolls in it and terrified me or whatever. And I mean, I've gotten over it as best as I can as an adult, and most of the time I'm okay in the dark. But, like, I can tell you, but, like, what good does that really do? And I can sit here and analyze it, or I can ask God to remove the fear. So the action's really important. So that paragraph, perhaps there's a better way. We think so. For we are now on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying upon God. Not just praying to God. We're actually not just faith, but trust. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. We are in the world to play the role He assigns. Just to the extent that we do what He thinks He would have us and humbly rely on Him, does He enable us to match calamity with serenity. One of the best promises in the book. And it gets breezed over all the time. And it's not a 9-step promise. We're right in the middle of the 4-step. So just to the extent that we do what He would have us, as long as I'm doing His will, and rely on Him. So that means that if I see something that's clear that I should be taking, oh, you know what, I've been late to work a lot, I should be on time to work. And I don't take that action. I need to take that action. So I not only do what He thinks He would have us, but I have to rely on Him. Or I'm trying to think of more apropos. Okay, so let's say romantic relationship. Let's say you're single. I'm single right now. So I have to rely on Him by not trying to put myself in a position where I'm not going after what I want. I have an ideals list. We'll get to that in a minute. But if I'm not following that ideals list, then I'm not really relying on Him. So if I'm relying on Him, anyway, you guys, I'll wrap it up. Just to the extent that we do as we think He would have us and humbly rely on Him, does He enable us to match calamity with serenity. So if I'm doing that thing, if I am actually treating women as I think God would have me, and I'm not trying to go out there and put my will into everything, and I'm doing those two things and letting God run the show with it, He enables me to match calamity with serenity. It's not promising me that I'm going to get a girlfriend. It's not promising me that I'm going to get a job, depending on what the situation is, but it is promising me that if I'm working with new people, I'm living this way of life, that I'm going to be okay. I think that's hopefully the only other opinion I dropped tonight, and it's a small one. I think that sometimes people get sold on this idea that spirituality means success. And a lot of the time, like, we have struggles when we get sober. I've seen a lot of people have their parents get sick, and they have to go take care of their parents. I've seen people not get jobs that they want to get. I've seen a lot of things happen where people struggle, but they're able to stay sober and continue applying these principles and working towards it. And the period usually ends. But we're not promised rainbows all the time, and I'm not promised that I'm going to get all this stuff. I've also seen a lot of people who never get in a romantic relationship when they get sober, and they're really useful to new people, but they struggle in that one area. Or they never really get solid employment. But they're happy, and they're useful people again, and and not only do they not drink, they're not hurting those around them, and they're benefiting other people. So that's what they're talking about with matching calamity with serenity, too. That, and also when really bad things happen, I'm able to. Anyway, I'm going to not beat this to death as a dead horse. Let's see. We never apologize to anyone for depending upon our Creator. We can laugh at those who think spirituality is the way of weakness. Paradoxically, it is the way of strength. The verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. We never apologize for God. Instead, we let Him demonstrate through us what He can do. Now, here's the fear prayer. We ask Him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what He would have us be. At once, we commence to outgrow fear. And again, with that fear prayer, you can use that fear prayer on that fear inventory that you've written. And with every fear, to begin getting into the process of using it. And you can have your sponsees do that as well. And it becomes a daily thing. I'm not going to be able to do. I'll be able to go through most of the sex inventory. So it says, now about sex, most of us need an overhaul in there. But above all, we try to be sensible on this question. I'm not going to read all of it, but basically the summation is that we all have different opinions on what sex is. And I have made the most mistakes I've made when it comes to this area is more being an arbiter of someone else's sex conduct. Especially when I'm new. I'm like, well, it says don't be an arbiter, but you really should not be talking to someone who's a new girl, and you shouldn't be doing this. It's not my place, especially if I'm not a sponsor. I'm a big person, believer in spiritual consent. So if Ron and I have an established friendship, and I do something goofy, I think it's pretty clear that I would be okay with Ron giving me a call on the phone and being like, hey, George, what are you doing with that girl, or what's going on there? But let's say Chris and I aren't really close. It's not true. I'd actually be okay if Chris called me too. But let's say I don't know Chris, and Chris calls me, and I'm not. My alcoholic ego is not going to listen to it. And it's really we got to be careful, because maybe Chris doesn't know the intricacies of my life and know what's really going on. Sometimes you don't know what's going on with a person, and you don't know whether they're being selfish or not. Sometimes you do. It's tough. I've made some mistakes, though, with this and trying to tell someone on what I really think that their values should be. It says, it even says on 69, we all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. What can we do about them? The highlight I'm going to give you guys on this is that there's 3 prayers in the sex inventory. We had 1 resentment prayer, 1 fear prayer, but there's 3 prayers when it comes to sex because we find it troublesome. And here's the inventory in a nutshell in 69. We reviewed our own conduct over the years past. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? Whom had we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? We got this all down on paper, talking about paper again, and we looked at it. So I've done the resentments, I've done the fears, now I'm looking at the sex inventory, and I'm writing this out. And again, I do it by column. And now, why do I do this? 2 parts. Well, the one I'm going to read a second in a paragraph. The other part is I'm going to probably have some amends I owe. More than likely, if someone's made my sex column and my sex inventory, I'm going to owe an amends to that person. It's really important, too, to go through a 5th step and work with a sponsor, because not every person should I be approaching. I need to check my motives. There's a lot that I need to run past before I go and make an amends to someone when it comes to sex conduct. But I'm a big proponent in making in-person, face-to-face amends to the best of my ability as often as possible. And the second half of it is this paragraph on 69. In this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. We subjected each relationship to this test. Was it selfish or not? We asked, here's the first prayer, we asked God to mold our ideals and help us live up to them. We remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised and loathed. So it's balance. I don't live in that balance often. I kind of go from extreme to extreme. I either am like, really, I like this, or, you know what, maybe I'm going a little too far. I have trouble being in the middle with it. And that's okay. But I'm using these prayers on a daily basis. I actually, personally, I use that prayer in the morning. I ask God every morning to mold my ideals and help me to live up to them. The next one talks about meditation. All right, it even says it. In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The right answer will come if we want it. So I'll throw that in every morning, like especially if I have someone like, all right, I'm dating this person. What should I do? Or I'm going on a date with this person, or I'm in a relationship and we're struggling with something. What should I do about this specific matter? And I bring it to God, and I listen in meditation. And sometimes because that's kind of outside of the scope of the talk too. Sometimes I get the answer in meditation. Sometimes I don't, and I go about my day and let God handle it, and something comes later. But I bring it. And I'm going to skip to the third one, where it says, to sum about sex, this is the third prayer. We earnestly pray for the right ideal, guidance in each questionable situation, sanity, and the strength to do the right thing. It really is a summation of the other two, but it also is talking about the strength to do the right thing. I will pray that when I'm in a bind. I'll also throw that in the morning as well. It talks about if sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves the harder into helping others. We think of their needs and work for them. This takes us out of ourselves. It quiets the imperious urge when to yield would mean heartache. And how I've seen people that struggle with this. And I'm going to go back up in a second and read that too before I go too far with that. But I personally have found when I get into this situation, and once I start going and working with a sponsor, I go to see my mom, help my mom, or do something around the house, do something for my employer, get in the habit of trying to put something into the stream of life, it tends to pass after a period of time. Because it's another form of obsession that we deal with, and my mind tends to quiet down, and I'm okay. Going back up a little bit, it talks about, suppose we fall short of the chosen ideal and we stumble. Does this mean we're going to get drunk? Some people tell us so, but this is only a half-truth. It depends on us and on our motives. If we are sorry for what we have done and have an honest desire to let God take us to better things, we believe we will be forgiven and we have learned our lesson. If we are not sorry and our conduct continues to harm others, we are quite sure to drink. We are not theorizing. These are facts out of our experience. And I have lived with someone and seen someone who did harm through sex conduct, and I saw him get drunk twice over it. It's definitely not a theory, and it may not happen in a month, it may not happen in 6 months, but if you harm people and you continue to harm people and don't make amends, you will pay for it. And the book's very clear about it. I didn't get to do some of the other death threats because it's a lot to cover, all of these inventories at one time. But that's like one of the very few things where it's talking about, like, we're not theorizing, these are facts out of our experience. Usually Bill talks in suggestions, or you might want to do this. Concrete. Don't hurt people and continue to hurt people. If you hurt people, take care of it. Talk with your sponsor and stop. And that's why we use if sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves the harder into helping others. At the end, it says, if we've been thorough about our personal inventory, we've written down a lot. We've listed and analyzed our resentments. We've begun to comprehend their futility and their fatality. We have commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. We have begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill toward all men, even our enemies, for we look on them as sick people. We have listed the people we have hurt by our conduct and are willing to straighten out the past if we can. Let's see. In this book, you read again and again that faith did for us what we could not do for ourselves. We are convinced now that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from Him. If you've already made a decision and an inventory of your grosser handicaps, you've made a good beginning. That being so, you have swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself. And in the next chapter, it'll talk about we need more action. The next chapter is called Into Action. And once I've written this down, I need to sit down with a sponsor and do a fifth step and go over it and see if I missed anything. Thanks for letting me share.
Thank you, George. Please limit your sharing to 3 minutes, and don't forget to remove your minutes. Please keep your shares related to the step. If you feel like drinking, or if you've had a drink today, please see me or speak to someone after the meeting. We ask that you please refrain from the use of profanity. We are in a church and on a spiritual journey. And with that, I'm going to turn the meeting back over to George for sharing.